Hey, good morning, Cornerstone. Welcome to the house of the Lord. As you can tell, I'm not there. Winnie and I are out of town. We are at a wedding for our niece. Didn't know it was going to be on a Sunday, but it was. And so I wanted to come to you by way of video once again. I did this back in the summer. I was gone with our teens on a trip and came to you this way. I was in the middle of a series or just started a series and didn't want to sort of cut short of that or interrupt that. I wanted to continue that. And so I wanted to come by way of video. If you're visiting with us, we thank you for being at Cornerstone today. I trust you felt welcome and that you have received a welcome folder, something like this. If you didn't, please get one before you leave. There's a connection card inside of that. Please fill that out. Turn that in back at the table or in the offering or somewhere, and you can begin the process of connecting with us. And of course, you've already seen the other ways that you can do that as well. Last week we started a series that I want to jump right back into called God with Us. That phrase comes really out of the Old Testament in a way. It was a prophecy that was given in Isaiah chapter 7, how God is with us through the Lord Jesus Christ. The prophecy was that a virgin would conceive and have a child, and that was fulfilled in Jesus when he came. And Matthew 1:23 really tells us that's the basis really of where we get this term God with us. It says, "Behold, a virgin shall be with child and shall bring forth a son, and his name shall be called Emmanuel," which being interpreted is God with us. But the truth is, Jesus didn't just come and live here among us for around 33 and a half years and then go back to heaven and leave us alone and forsake us and, leave us to make it on our own. The Bible said that he sent the Holy Spirit to be the comforter, to be one called alongside to help us, to be one just like he was here in the flesh. Now spiritually, his Spirit resides with us, around us, even within us if we open up our hearts to him and receive him, and that he is with us, and therefore we don't have to go through any circumstance, any situation alone. We can be guaranteed that we have his presence with us, and that doesn't just mean in the good times, but also in the bad times, in the difficult times, in the challenging times. And last week we looked how that God is with us in the valley. We looked at Psalm 84. We talked a little bit about Psalm 23 and David, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And as we go through those things, how that God is with us. This week I want to talk a little bit about how God is with us in the wilderness. And so I want you to open your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 19. 1 Kings chapter number 19. And the wilderness, you say, okay, well, wait a minute. He's with us in the valley. He's with us in the wilderness. Isn't that pretty much the same thing? Well, there are similarities, but there are also distinctions. For me, and this is just in my thinking and in my heart, I think a valley is a time when there's a specific issue that's going on that's made things difficult. It could be a family issue, financial issue. Maybe you lost your job. Maybe there's a child that is rebelling, and it's made things difficult. But a wilderness, honestly, and we'll see this, begins to happen even on the inside of us. It's kind of when we lose our faith, we lose sight of things, we just kind of feel lost. And some of that happens inwardly and can lead us to situations and places outwardly where it's like being in a wilderness. And so we spend time there wondering and waiting, and we can even question in those times, does this place have any purpose? And we can feel abandoned, we can feel alone, we can feel disappointed, and we'll see that that's how a man by the name of Elijah felt. But even in those times, the Bible promises that God is with us. And so to look at how God is with us, looking at this passage of Scripture in 1 Kings 19. Now the backstory briefly is that Israel has been toying and playing and really on the fringes of idolatry. They've allowed some things to happen and coexist with the one true God that they shouldn't have. And Elijah the prophet has taken this hard stance against King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, who was very, very wicked. And Elijah has a showdown on Mount Carmel with hundreds of false prophets, prophets of Baal, which was a false god. And he stood up for what's right, but it's going, as we see, it's going to take its toll. He gets tired, he gets weary, and now he's going to be threatened. We pick it up in 1 Kings chapter number 19, beginning at verse number 1. It says, "And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and withal how he had slain all the prophets," that's the false prophets, "with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time." In other words, by this time tomorrow, you're a dead man. I'm coming to get you. What you did to them, I'm going to make sure happens to you. That was the threat he received from Jezebel. And when he saw that, he arose and went for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongeth to Judah, and left his servant there. Now watch this. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a juniper tree. And he requested for himself that he might die, and said, It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. My fathers, the ones that came before me, they couldn't stir up Israel. They couldn't get anywhere. I haven't gotten anywhere. And now I really just want to die. And as he lay and slept under a juniper tree, behold, an angel touched him and said unto him, Arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was a cake baking on the coals, and a cruse of water at his head. And he did eat and drink, and laid him down again. And the angel of the Lord came again the second time, and touched him, and said, Arise and eat. Here's a key phrase, because the journey is too great for thee. And he arose, and did eat and drink, and went in the strength of that meat 40 days and 40 nights unto Horeb, the mountain of God. So I want to talk about how God is with us in the wilderness. Notice that Elijah in this passage, when he's threatened by Jezebel, he goes into the wilderness. But in that wilderness, God begins to show up. And that's what to cut to the punchline, that's what I really want someone to experience today. I don't want you to just be aware of a promise. I don't want you to just hear a message. I want you to experience the reality of the presence of God right in your wilderness. I want you to know that right there where you are, it's not when you pick yourself up. It's not when things get better. It's not when things turn around. It's not when you get to feeling better about yourself or you feel like you're doing better in your own opinion. Right there where you are, He is with you. And in this wilderness that Elijah goes in, God shows up. And man, I want to tell you that I believe God to show up in some people's wilderness experience today. I want you to experience that reality. As I said earlier, the wilderness is sort of linked and comparable to the valley. But even in a valley, you've got a mountain on this side and a mountain on this side. You've got this valley, you sort of still have a directional flow. You can still go a particular way. You sort of know what you need to do, or where the direction anyway that you need to go. But when you enter into a wilderness, sort of this vast desert, this wide open space, you can easily get lost, turned around, and not know exactly what to do or where to go. When you're in a valley, you know that you may have just come off of a mountain and you want to get to another mountain. Okay, so you know what you want to do and where you need to go. But when you're in a wilderness, everything's flat. Have you ever been through a stage of life where everything was flat? Your relationships was flat, your marriage was flat, the career was flat, your ministry was flat. Everything just seemed to be flat. And it can sort of even seem like a wilderness, a wasteland, like a desert. There's no water, there's no refreshing, there's no replenishing. And things just kind of get flat and they plateau, and you can sort of lose your bearings. And man, I don't even know where I'm at. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get out of this. And so this is where Elijah finds himself. So a valley still has direction, but a wilderness sort of, you don't know what to do next. You sort of seem lost. And the odd thing is that sometimes we end up in a wilderness when we've been trying to do the right thing. We've been trying to stand for what's right, to do what's right, to be right in all that we do. That was certainly the case for Elijah. And he had stood up against false prophets and false doctrines and false teachings and things that would try to lead God's people astray. And consider somebody else who experienced a wilderness, even right after a spiritually exhilarating experience, and that is Jesus himself. The Bible tells us in the Gospels that he was baptized by John in the Jordan. He was the Spirit descended upon him in form of a dove. The Father speaks this word of validation over him. This is my Son. You need to hear him. Nothing could hardly surpass that or top that. But the very next verse in one of the Gospels, after it says that the Father spoke over him, the very next verse says, then the Spirit drove him into the wilderness. And we see what was going to go on there too. This was not just for preparation. This was not just for replenishment. He is there, the Bible said, to be tempted or tested of the devil. And so the wilderness is a place of testing. When you find yourself in a wilderness, we find from Jesus that some things are being tested in your life. The wilderness will test your patience. The wilderness will test your trust. The wilderness will test your resolve. The wilderness will trust your confidence. It'll test your confidence in yourself and in God. It will test everything that you can think of and so much more. Maybe somebody betrays you. Maybe you lose your job. Maybe your pay is suddenly cut. Maybe your position is suddenly eliminated, and it can leave you reeling, and you're just kind of lost. What do I even do now? And it can leave you hurting and confused and bewildered and empty. But I don't want to get too far into this without making a key point, and that is this. And I want you to please hear me, that your deepest need, in fact your deepest pain, but your deepest need can become your greatest gift if it drives you to depend on God. Your greatest need, your greatest pain, the greatest disruption and bewilderment in your life right now can be one of the greatest gifts you will ever receive if it drives you to depend on God. So if whatever is in your life right now is causing you great pain, if it is causing you to hurt and to ache, if it becomes a catalyst for you to seek Christ in a greater way, to seek God, to totally throw yourself upon Him, then the very thing that is grieving you right now could be one of the greatest gifts that you have ever been given. Not because of what you're experiencing now, but because of what you can experience through it. Look at Paul the Apostle, when the Bible talks in Corinthians about him having what he called a thorn in his flesh. It was probably a spiritual attack. It was could have been mixed with some physical ailments that he had. There's several ways that people have looked at that over the years. But the truth is that it was a constant source of infirmity and frustration and aggravation for him. And Paul said this, I've prayed and I've prayed and I've prayed. 3 times he prayed that the Lord would remove it. And he prayed and he wondered. He just wondered, God, what are you doing? When are you going to move for me? And he said and eventually that the thorn was not removed. He said, I've been given so many revelations, but in order to keep me grounded, there was given to me this, watch this, given to me this thorn in the flesh. He said it was something given. It was a gift to me. For through the thorn, he realized something. The Lord eventually said to him, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. And Paul says this, it was a gift given to me, and here's why I know. He said, because I got the revelation of God's grace and the sufficiency of his grace and his strength. I received the revelation of that through the thorn in the flesh that I couldn't pray away, that wouldn't go away. And so that's sort of what I want to encourage you in today. I want you to know that when you pray and things don't change and things don't go away, God can still be working and moving in your life. I want you to notice several things about Elijah's situation. Now remember, Elijah is a prophet. He's been mightily used by God. He's prayed. He's prayed for it to stop raining, and it hasn't rained for 3.5 years. After that, he has been standing up to King Ahab. He stood up to Jezebel. He stood up for what was right. He's been supernaturally fed by ravens. He's been sustained repeatedly in supernatural ways. He has just conquered hundreds of false prophets, and God has actually answered his prayer by fire. And then he prays again, and after 3.5 years of drought, God now sends rain. And so it sounds to me, when you look at it like that, you just think, man, this guy ought to be, relishing and rejoicing instead of running. But I want to tell you something I found out. I found this out in life. I found this out in ministry. You can still get tired even when everything's going good. You can still get tired even when everything's going good. You can look around and say, man, there's nothing really that bad or negative that's happening, but I just kind of have lost my energy. I've lost my motivation. Listen, everything breaks. Everything crashes. And it's not because necessarily something wrong happens. Something may break that's been running perfectly. It's like a vehicle. Everything's going good. Everything's going... But man, even while everything's going good, it can begin to wear down, wear out. And eventually, if it's not, you don't pay attention to it, eventually it can break. It can break down. And the same is true with us. Everything can be going good, but it's still, even the good things can take a toll on us. And so you can still get tired even when everything's going good. And I believe that this is something we see in Elijah. I believe that Elijah has been weakened and wearied. I believe he's tired. All of those things that God did through him, yet it's taken its toll. And so now Queen Jezebel has threatened him and basically says, what you did to those prophets in killing them, here's what's going to happen. By tomorrow this time, you're going to be a dead man. I'm going to take your life. And Elijah, tired, maybe he was afraid. And you say, well, not Elijah. Elijah wouldn't have been afraid. Well, I'll tell you why he might have been afraid. Because he was tired. Because the truth of the matter is, when you're tired, you change. When you're tired, you change. You can be easygoing. You can be the nicest, sweetest person. And then when you get tired, you reach that point and somebody says something, gets on your nerves, and you can snap I mean, you go from a goldfish to a snapping turtle. You know what I mean? I mean, you're just swimming along and you're just, oh, ain't that cute? And then all of a sudden, here comes the snap, and so because when we're tired, we change. Our thoughts change. Our patience changes. What we can tolerate changes. I've said many, many, many times, tired eyes rarely see a great future. You rarely see things positive when you're tired. So you don't want to make major decisions when you're tired, because you're not looking at things the right way most of the time. And after all those things that God did through him, Jezebel threatens him, by this time tomorrow, you're going to be a dead man. And Elijah, tired, maybe afraid, perhaps questioning God, I thought this was going to really turn things around in this nation. After all of that, he runs for his life, so to speak. And the Bible tells us he ends up going a day's journey into the wilderness. Now, I want to make just a couple of points on this, okay? First of all, he did not pray for direction. He did not pray for direction. There's no record of him asking God what to do in this situation. It seems that he's had some communication with God about the initial drought, about the ravens feeding him, about going to Zarephath where the widow sustained him, about then going to Mount Carmel. It seems like God's been communicating with him every step of the way, about praying to end the drought, all of those things. But now, there seems to be no communication between he and God. And that's one of the danger zones, is when our communication with God breaks down. I can tell you this from experience. Okay, I can tell you this from experience. There's times, man, things just get busy. Maybe you oversleep. Maybe just things, you got to be somewhere really early. Somebody has this going on. Hey, this is an early day, or this is, and so a lot of things can begin to go on. And sometimes you're just tired, and as much as you want to, you just can't find motivation. Okay, that's the human part of it. And so we don't see him asking for direction. God, should I go into the wilderness? He doesn't ask that. He just goes, because he's trying to find some repose. He's trying to find some kind of solace. He's trying to find some kind of refuge. And instead of going to the Lord and saying, Lord, you're going to have to strengthen me to stand, he just says, you know what? It's fight or flight. And in this case, I think flight is better, because I've fought and I've fought and I've fought and I've fought, and I don't have any fight left. Have you ever been there? Get to a point where you don't have any fight left. And now flight seems more lucrative than fight. And most of us, listen, most of us can handle a whole lot. But it always only takes that one more thing. Have you ever, if one more person says, if I hear one more time this, if one more thing happens, if that phone rings one more time, if I get one more text, for all of us, it's only one more thing. We don't know when that one more thing is going to come. We can, and so what happens, even good things, even positive things, we're still using energy, we're still putting thought into it, we're still going through all of that, and we can end up losing our sharpness, we can lose our spiritual equilibrium, our spiritual bearings. Everybody has a breaking point. And so I submit to you that Elijah is not just physically tired. He is emotionally spent, he is mentally drained, he could have even been spiritually depleted based on what he has gone through, because too often those, even in ministry, whether it's through song, whether it's through preaching, whether it's with children, whether it's whatever role that you are in, you are always giving out, and you have to learn. You got to take time to replenish. You got to take time to receive, and so I submit to you something else, that he didn't pray for direction. He ended up in the wilderness. And I want to submit something to you, that before Elijah was ever in a wilderness outwardly, he entered into a wilderness inwardly. He was in that wide open space. Inwardly, he didn't know what to do. Inwardly, he just kind of lost his way. I didn't say he backslid, didn't say he forsook God. I'm not saying that he sinned against God. I'm just saying this is the ebb and flow of the Christian life. And there are times you can have the greatest of intentions and the greatest of passion and desire. The Bible said in the book of James that Elijah was a man with passions just like us. And yet in those passions, man, we can get to a place inwardly where we just can't make heads or tails. We can't make spiritual sense out of things. And I submit to you that many, many times before we end up in a place like a wilderness place that people can recognize outwardly, we've already gone there inwardly. And so maybe I'm getting to somebody just in time. See, maybe there are people there this morning who are, it's recognizable that you're in the wilderness, but there could be other people that inside, that's where you're headed. You haven't got there outwardly yet. You're not really showing the signs outwardly yet because you're going through the motions and you're pressing on. But inwardly, it's like, man, I'm really struggling here. And many times we can even get stuck in the outward wilderness because of the inward wilderness that's taking place in our hearts. So get this. Elijah didn't pray for direction. There was no inquiring of God. So he was not sent to the wilderness. He is there by his own choosing, by following his own passions, by doing what he felt was best. And maybe due to exhaustion on many levels, he let the outward circumstances become, his inward motivation. He's heard the threats. He's seen what Jezebel has done and to others. And he says, man, I don't want to end up like that. And so he's let the outward negativity produce inward negativity. And when those two things work together, they can be a force to be reckoned with. Now, before all of this message seems hopeless and drab, that's a lot of diagnosing and a lot of talk about all of that. But that's not the point of the message, is it? The message title is not, I'm in the wilderness and I can't get out. Somebody help, I can't get up. Life alert. That's not the message. What's the message? God is with us in the wilderness. So one, he didn't pray about the direction. He's ended up in the wilderness really by following whether it's internal advice or what have you. But the second thing that I want you to know is this, and this is where the hope comes in, is that God met him in his wilderness. God met him in his wilderness. And that's powerful to me. Because here he's made some, what I would term some bad choices, bad decisions, okay? But the powerful thing is that God did not forsake him. He didn't seek God, he didn't ask God, he didn't inquire of God, but God did not say, now you're on your own. You know what God did? God showed up in his wilderness. And you may say, I didn't mean to show up, I didn't mean to end up where I'm at. I didn't mean for this to happen, but this is where I am. What do I do now? I'll tell you what you do. You look for God. Because I promise you, if you will look for God in the wilderness, God will show up in your wilderness. When you look at the biblical pattern of people who were in the wilderness, you'll see the same thing over and over and over and over. I don't have time to go through it all, but I'll give you some passages and stories to go back and look at later. Genesis 16, he met Hagar in the wilderness. In Exodus 3, he met Moses in the wilderness. After Israel would come out of Egypt, where did he take them and lead them through? The wilderness. He fed them. He gave them water to drink. He worked miracles among them. All through 40 years of being in the wilderness, God was with them. He was with Jesus in the wilderness. And here he shows up with Elijah in the wilderness. And guess what? If you are right now or ever do end up in a wilderness, guess what? God's going to be with you too. God's going to be with you. This is the promise. This is the biblical pattern. And he may be harder to discern. It may be more difficult to trace him. But I promise you that he's there. God is with us in the wilderness. And the powerful thing is he's not just there. Let me cover a couple of things really quick. He's not just there, but he does some wonderful things while he's there with Elijah that I trust him to do for you today. You see, his presence alone would be powerful. His presence alone is enormous. But he doesn't just show up, but he's there to minister to Elijah in the wilderness. Oh, listen, he's not just with you in the wilderness, he's there to minister to you in the wilderness. The Bible said in Isaiah 43:19, behold, I'll do a new thing. Will you not perceive it? This is what he said, I will even make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. He said, I'm not just going to show up. I'm not just going to do it. I am going to make a way in the wilderness. I'm going to move. I'm going to work in the wilderness. And I want to tell you something. It's great for him to work where everything is green and plush, and he makes me to lay down in green pastures. But listen, I'm telling you, when everything is desert land and everything is a wilderness, man, when God works in the wilderness is one of the most powerful things and experiences and times in your life. And so he may be harder to discern, but I promise you he's working. He's there. He will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. Elijah, the Bible said, had fallen asleep under a juniper tree. The angel of the Lord comes, which could have been Christ in Old Testament form. Regardless of that, the angel of the Lord comes, and this is what it says, and touches him. You need a touch? You need a touch in the wilderness? That's what he comes to do. First thing he did was he touched him. He touched him. And sometimes it's just that touch. Sometimes we just, the awareness that he's there. Sometimes it's not fixing things. Sometimes it's not him changing things. Sometimes it's not him teaching us anything. It's just a touch, just laying a hand on our shoulder saying, hey, I'm here. You're not in this by yourself. And so the Lord touches him, and then he speaks. You need a word in your wilderness. He speaks, and he says, arise and eat. Now this is interesting. The word arise, by the way, is a powerful word. He says to arise. Change your posture and your position. Arise, one version says, arise from the depression that has held you down. And it is just as much about getting up inwardly as it is getting up outwardly. It wasn't just about physically rising, but rise up in your heart. Arise in your heart. Change the posture of your heart. Change the position of your heart. Change the expectation of your heart. And I want you to notice this. Notice that the Lord, when he spoke to him, the Lord didn't preach him a sermon. He didn't rebuke him. He didn't reprimand him. In fact, the Lord seemed to have great compassion and almost pity him. The Bible said in Psalm 103:14 that the Lord knows our frame and remembers that we are dust. You know, last week I said that we've almost idolized independence, but we've also almost idolized toughness and resilience, and man, you gotta really be macho, and you gotta be tough, and you gotta be strong. And you know what you do? You do have to be strong. But I can tell you this too: there's a certain dimension of the Lord's ministry that we will never ever experience until we find ourselves in situations where we feel weak, where we feel wearied, and where we become vulnerable. The Bible said that he's close to the brokenhearted. It doesn't say he's close to the strong-hearted, he's close to the brokenhearted. Because when we're broken, we kind of find it easier to look to him and to lean on him for strength. And as long as we kind of project ourselves as being strong, in a way we cut ourselves off from his strength. And don't misunderstand, I'm not saying that we should make weakness our confession. I'm just weak, I can't do anything. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we have to learn and understand that we have limitations, and it's okay to be able to say, I can't do this, I can't face this, I can't handle this. God, I need your strength. That's what he's waiting for. It's what he's waiting for. I remember, as we all grow up, we begin to want to do things on our own, and there was a time I was having car trouble, and I was living on my own at the time, and my dad had always helped, because when I lived at home, he was there, and he was able to do it, and I always welcomed it. But I hated to bother him. When I'm living on my own. I was about 30 minutes away, and so I said, I can do this. And I would call and ask him questions and stuff, and I never did ask him to come help. And finally, I couldn't. It was almost a two-person job. There are some things that are two-person jobs, and so I said I'm gonna have to call him, and so I called and I asked him if he could help me, and he came and we got it fixed. But I was later talking to my mom, and my mom said, "Your dad was so happy when you asked for his help." And I just thought about how the Father is sometimes. We try to do it on our own, and we try to, take care of things ourselves. We think that's what God has given us this, and I don't want to let God down. But you know what? I found out as your Father, He's just waiting on you to ask. And He's so excited when we say, God, I need your help. Father, I need you to help me with this. And so there's nothing wrong with getting to a point to where we say, I can't handle this on my own. I need His help. And so because if you're always strong enough and tough enough and you're always sturdy enough on your own, you'll never really know the Lord's strength. And Paul said, His strength is made perfect in my weakness. And so there's nothing necessarily wrong with getting to a point to where we admit, I cannot do this on my own. I have to have God's help. And so the Lord comes. He sees Elijah, and first he seems to pity him, and he shows great compassion. The angel touches him, says, arise and eat. Elijah wakes up, sees the bread and water. He eats it, and then you know what happens? He falls back asleep. He goes back to sleep. He is still tired. He is still weary. But I love what the Bible says next. I'm almost done. I love what it says next. He says, then the angel of the Lord came again the second time. That is a great, great line. The angel of the Lord came again the second time. Now I'm glad we serve the God of second chances. I'm glad that even when I may find myself in a situation or a circumstance to where I have contributed to me being there, that God doesn't say, hey, you've made your bed, now sleep in it. He doesn't say, hey, this one's on you. You know what He says? He says, hey, I'll come and I'll come again. I'll come to you and I'll come to you again. We serve a God. I am glad that we serve a God who doesn't give up on us. I've been asked many times over the years, about, trying to help different people, and why do you spend time doing this and doing that? And all I have to do is look with the patience that God has, with me. I will never give up on somebody. Sometimes you can help people and sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can invest in them, sometimes you can't, depending on what they allow you to do as well. But all I have to do is look at how God deals with me and puts up with me. And I say, hey, if He can have patience with me, I can have patience with other people. We serve a God of second chances who meets us in our wilderness, not to scold us, not to rebuke us, not to reprimand us. He meets us to minister. He meets us to feed us, to quench our thirst, to strengthen us. And I just want somebody to know that's in the sanctuary today. I really believe this, that the Lord is coming to you again. I know He came before and He let you push the snooze button like He did Elijah. He let you just go on back to sleep. He woke you up, He stirred you, and you said, man, yeah, now I'm ready. And then before long, you was right back asleep. Spiritually, mentally, okay? And then you feel condemned over it, right? No, don't. The Lord's coming to you again. He's giving you another chance. He came before, but He lets you rest and recover, but He's coming again to meet you in the wilderness, to minister, to strengthen, to encourage you. And the second time the angel came and fed him again, he adds this line. He says, arise and eat. And here's why. Because the journey is too great for thee. Whether you realize it or not, God knows. God knows that the journey that you're on, that you can't do it by yourself. And he says, listen, the journey is too great for you. And so God is with us in the wilderness because he knows that if we are left to our own devices, we're not going to make it. And we are not prepared or equipped to handle many of those places on our own. And so Elijah goes in the strength of the Lord. And he goes 40 days and 40 nights, symbolic of a time of great testing. 40 days, 40 nights. Noah, it rained 40 days and 40 nights. Jesus is in the wilderness 40 days and 40 nights, right? And so here he goes in the strength of it 40 days and 40 nights, and he comes back to Horeb, which is the Mount of God, which is where God gave the Ten Commandments, and he met with Moses on the mountain in his glory and all of that. Listen, so he comes back to the mountain of God. Listen, I believe that what he did for Elijah, he wants to do for you. God met Elijah in the wilderness, but moved him to the mountain of God. Moved him into the place of the presence of God. And I believe that what he wants to do for you today is literally, actually move you from your wilderness to the mountain of God. You've been tired, you've been depleted, you've been running on empty, you've been struggling within, you've been struggling without. But God wants to renew his work in you today. And he wants to get you back to Horeb. He wants to get you back to a fresh encounter with his presence. And so while Elijah is at Horeb, among the many things the Lord did, he said, I want you to go out and stand before the presence of the Lord. Remember this? We hear this preached all the time. Elijah goes out and a wind comes that is so strong it rends the rocks, but the Lord wasn't in it. Then an earthquake comes and the Lord wasn't in it. Then there was a fire that came from him, but the Lord wasn't in it. And then the Bible says, what was it? A still small voice. Okay, now I don't want to whisper too low because I don't know whether you can hear it or not, but here's the thing. God whispers. And this is amazing. He came in a still small voice. Do you know why he came in a still small voice? Why would God whisper to Elijah? I believe it's this. Because when you whisper, you can only effectively communicate with someone through a whisper if you are near them, if you are close to them, if you are with them. And so God was saying to Elijah, hey, I'm with you. I'm with you. I was with you by the brook. I was with you at the widow's house. I was with you at Mount Carmel. I'm with you in the wilderness. And you're looking for, you are never alone, Elijah. I'm near you. I'm close to you. I'm with you. And sometimes we have to be careful as believers, especially of Pentecostal faith, because sometimes we listen for God to resound in our lives like thunder. We want a booming breakthrough. We want an explosive experience and encounter. But I found out you can't just have faith in the fascinating. You can't just have expectation in the exhilarating. You have to learn how to be strong in the stillness, how to have faith in the quietness, and how you can learn how to win even in the whispers of God. One of my favorite scriptures in closing is John 16:32. It's the verse where Jesus is trying to prepare his disciples for his crucifixion. I believe he's trying to prepare himself too. And it's right before he tells the disciples, in this world you shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. Right before he says that, he says these words to him. He says, behold, the hour comes and now is come, that you will be scattered, every man to his own, and you shall leave me alone. You're going to leave me. You're going to forsake me, and I'm going to be alone. Then he says this, and yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me. Jesus' fortitude in facing the future was only found in one thing. It was found in the fact that the Father was with him. And that's where you and I find strength and faith for the future as well. Knowing that God is with us. And so, friend, today, listen. Take it from Hagar. Take it from Moses. Take it from Israel. Take it from Elijah. Take it from Jesus himself. And take it from me. You are not alone in the wilderness. God is with you, and he has promised not to leave you, but to be with you even to the end of the age. He is close to the brokenhearted. Psalm 34:18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. He's with you to feed you, to strengthen you, to prepare you to face the future. He is with you in the wilderness. Let's bow our heads. Father, so thankful for your goodness and your grace. Thankful for your love and mercy. Thankful for your word that tells us that even when we are in wilderness situations and circumstances, that you are with us, that we are not alone. So God, I pray your blessing on people that are here today. If there's someone that does not know Jesus, I pray that you would reveal yourself to them. They are in a wilderness of sin. But Father, let them know that you are there calling them to yourself. And may they hear your voice and respond. Father, if there is one of your children today that find themselves in a wilderness, maybe not even externally, but inside, in their heart, Father, I pray that you would do the same thing and that you did with Elijah, that you would touch them, that you would speak to them, that you would feed them, that you would strengthen them, God, for the journey ahead. And that, Father, you would let them know that you are with them. And Father, would you do what you did with Elijah? Would you strengthen them to the point that they can make it from the wilderness back to the mountain of God, back to the place where your presence, your power, your spirit will move in their life in a fresh new way again. Father, we love you for it. We'll praise you for it. I have a song I want them to play here in just a moment. I really do appreciate you being there today. I apologize for not being able to be there. But I'm so glad that you came, and I pray the Lord has spoken to you through this word. He's not done yet, because this song that's going to play is going to remind you that he is with you, and no matter what you go through, you're not alone, you're not by yourself, but his presence is there by his Spirit. He's leading, he's guiding, he's watching over you. As David said, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. And he even said, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, even in the wilderness. Hey, I really appreciate you. May the Lord bless you. Listen to this song. Let's stand together and let's worship the Lord, and then someone's coming to close out the service. God bless you.